It's time to finish this bowl. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to finish this roughed out bowl. This bowl was roughed out almost 2.5 years ago and it's thoroughly equalized. And today we're going to do the final turning of that. Now, the reason why we do twice turn bowls, and I've got a video all about that, you want to check it out, is basically we want to let the wood dry and distort one time, and then we true it back up so that it's nice and round and it won't distort. Ideally, it won't distort anymore in the future. This bowl was nice and trued up when it came off the lathe 2.5 years ago. This rim was flat, and if you look at that, you can see how it's rising up. The pith area also looks like it's rising up, but it's kind of an optical illusion because what happens is the sides of a side grain bowl pull inward as they dry. So these sides have dropped down a bit as they contracted into the bowl, and it makes it look like the pith has risen a little bit. So all of that movement is done with this particular piece of wood, and now we're going to turn it again and true it back up and give it its final look and shape. Now, an added bonus with this bowl, which is pretty cool, is I'm not going to be finishing this bowl. The people over at Tried and True Finishes are going to finish this bowl for me, and it'll be interesting to see how they go about finishing the piece on their end. Now, typically I do it on the lathe, and the reason I leave my Tried and True product on the lathe is it needs to really set up for 24 hours before you burnish it out. And it's really nice to burnish it with the lathe moving. And I burnish with the 4/0 steel wool if you've seen any of my other videos. So I'm going to take this bowl to the finished shape and I'm going to sand it out, and then I'm going to get it over to the guys at Tried and True and let them finish it, and we'll see what they come up with. And another reason why this particular bowl was chosen is this is mulberry, and mulberry has medullary lines or rays that come out from the pith area. So if you imagine the tree grows vertically and we have all the rings that grow up around that, each year it grows out rings. Well, some trees, and the mulberry included, have growth that goes from the pith or the center out towards the bark. And that growth orientation, oak is also another one that's really well known for having medullary rays. But that growth creates these different lines and grain patterns in the wood. So you'll get this really cool reflective glow from the wood at certain angles. It's called chatoyance. It's kind of a French word that has to do with the shimmer and that you would see in a gemstone, but it can also be applied to wood like you're going to see in this particular piece. So that's why this piece of mulberry was picked. Let's get this mounted to the lathe and see how it turns out. Okay, so I'm going to use my jam chuck, and this is the spaced jam chuck. I have two outer sides, as you can see, and these have a rubber pad on them. This design I discovered from Glenn Lucas works really well. Basically, that pith area that is higher than the rest of the rim fits down into that cavity. That way we've got a nice even contact with the bull blank on the jam chuck. And then I'm going to bring the tailstock up here and apply pressure. Find that center point. Now, remember, everything's distorting with this twice turn bowl because it is dried and distorted. So what I do here is I place my thumb up against the tool rest and hold it in position, and I try to find any areas that are out of balance, higher, or that are bumping my thumb more than others. What I want is I want it to be relatively even when it goes around. But I have to keep in mind too that it is distorted from the drying process. So right off the bat, I'm going to use my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge, and I'm going to true up the cylinder or the side of the tenon. Just doing a simple little push cut in towards the jam chuck. I call this a jam chuck. It's kind of a jam plate. You can kind of call it whatever you want. And I'm also going to true up the surface of the tenon because it too is distorted through the drying process. So I'll make this nice and flat and true. And then I'll mark where the tenon is going to be sized. and then continue with the push cuts, shaping the tenon with the 1/2-inch bolt gouge. You can see the shavings coming off. This is a very dry wood. Typically, wet green wood produces larger shavings. It peels off a little easier, and the fibers don't break apart as quickly. So you get longer fibers with wet wood and shorter fibers coming off with dry wood. Okay, so I've established where the tenon will be and where the shoulder will be. Now I can start working down the curve of the exterior of the bowl. Making just a very simple push cut. I have the flute of the bowl gouge leading towards the direction of the cut. Now this bowl is uneven, so I'm feeling the unevenness. I'm making a cut, but then I'm also hitting negative space where the bowl is recessed and it's not cutting in a certain location. So I have to watch that. I have to make sure I'm getting a cut everywhere. So on the sides it's cutting, but in this area right there it was not cutting. So I'm getting a skipping sound. You really want to listen to your bowl gouge as you're turning. Some really cool chatoyance happening there with the different knots that are in the piece. Here you can see it's cutting and then it's not cutting because that area is a little bit more recessed. Those are the sides that were pulled in. So you can see the unevenness of the cut. So you want to take your time. You don't want to make too deep of a cut, but we want to remove all the material evenly so that all sides get cut and get leveled to the same shape. So I'll pick up that cut and continue. You can see the bowl gouge bouncing around there. Now, unfortunately, I missed a couple takes there. I didn't have the camera running, but what I'm creating here is an OG shape. And an OG shape is essentially a balanced curve where there's two recessed areas and one protruding area. So at the bottom next to the base of the bowl, you can see where it goes inward and then it comes out towards the middle of the bowl and then it comes back in towards the rim of the bowl. I'll do an OG video in the future, so pay attention for that, and I'll go into more detail about creating an OG shaped bowl. It's a very subtle curve. It doesn't need to be very deep. Now I have a high spot there. You can see that high spot. Instead of trying to make another cut, which will most likely become too deep, I'm just going to use the edge of the bottom wing of the bowl gouge to shave that. And then I changed my mind here because I actually am going to make a light cut and take that high spot down. But it's a very, very thin cut. You can see just removing a very fine amount of material. I really want this finished curve to be very smooth right off the bowl gouge. I don't want to have to be doing too much sanding here. Just take it nice and slow. There's still a little bit of a high spot there, so we're kind of sneaking up on the shape. You can see where I need to remove more material up to that rim. So I'll back up just a little bit and pick up the cut and then follow it right around that curve. Now I'm not taking the rim all the way up to the padding here because I don't want to connect with the jam plate or the jam chuck. Okay, so now I'm going to go back and reshape and finalize the tenon, clean up the shoulder there, and now I'm going to use my detail spindle gouge to make a push cut and define the angle of for the four-jaw chuck. That inward angle is super important so the jaws of the chuck will really grip this tenon. You want to make sure that's nice and clean inside there. Okay, so now we can take the blank off the jam plate And we can reverse that and get into the four-jaw chuck. Now the four-jaw chuck has a beveled angle, or mine does rather. There are some that have a straight jaw. I really don't prefer those for bowl turning because you really want to have a good firm connection here. Mine have about an 11-degree angle both on the inside and the outside of the jaws, and that allows this to really grip that tenon well and not allow it to slide out. So right off the bat, I'm going to deal with this rim and get this squared away. We know from the beginning of the video you saw how distorted that rim was, so I need to take off the high spots. I'm going to make very small, light passes here, just removing the high spots initially. You can see there's the high spot, and then it's not getting anything on the sides, but it's hitting the high spot. So we need to level that all out. Remember to bring the tool rest up nice and close so you have good support each time too. Here I have the flute more open, or it's rotated upward more. This could be potentially dangerous for a catch, but if you're making a very light cut, it's perfect for making a fine finishing cut. You just want to be careful you don't get aggressive with the flute open like that, because you will get a nasty catch. I'm also designing the rim so that it tips down into the bowl. It's just a particular look that I like. It's kind of functional too. If you have something on the rim of the bowl, instead of falling out of the bowl, it will typically roll or fall into the bowl with the rim angled into the bowl. Now I'm going to start positioning the inside where that inside wall can be, and start taking a look at the rim. And I've got this unevenness on the outside of the rim too, so that all has to be addressed. So I'm going to go ahead and just make a really light cut here. Super light, go nice and slow so we're not ripping out material. Finish up the edge of that rim so it's nice and even. Now because this is an OG shape, I can get in here and do a little more shaping just with the lower wing of the bowl gouge. I don't want to go too far down that outside of the bowl because it'll be real easy to get catches there. Same with the inside of the rim. I can use the bottom wing just to make some light scraping cuts here. There's still some areas that need to be addressed. Here you can see I'm just shaping that top curve of the OG using a scraping cut. This is not a shear scrape because I don't have the handle dropped. This is just a scraping cut using the lower wing of the bowl gouge. Go nice and slow. It's like shaving the material, getting it shaped exactly the way you want. Okay, so now I'm going to come and do a nice, clean, continuous pass shaping the rim. You can see how I went around the top and now it's dropping down into the bowl. And there's that chatoyance. You can start picking up the wood grain there shimmering in the light. With the finish on it, it's going to look really good. Okay, so the rim's been established. Now we're going to start clearing out material on the inside. You can see the dust in the air. Now, if you saw my video about cleaning up and vacuums and how to clean up the lathe when you're turning, I don't use a vacuum. I actually just let the dust and everything hit the ground. I'm using gravity, and then I sweep it up and I vacuum up the floor and that. But while I'm turning, I have my respirator on at all times because this is very fine particles. This is the stuff you really don't want to be breathing, and you definitely don't want it in your lungs. So be sure you're wearing a respirator. Even if you had a vacuum at the lathe at this point, a vacuum cannot pick up all of the debris that's flying through the air, and you really have to have a respirator on. Okay, there's a problem that's occurring here, and it's hard to see at the moment, but you can see on the interior of the bowl, there are lines that are forming. See those lines? There, you can see them really well. There's lines on the inside. I want a nice smooth interior, so What is going on? Now, there are lots of things that can mess up the interior of a wood bowl, but this particular one is a very easy one to address. It's relatively smooth there, you can see that, but out there, I've got this rough edge. So I need to do something here. And I'm going to remove a little more material before I get into this and show you guys the solution to get rid of those grooves. First of all, we need to realize what's making those grooves. And what's making the grooves is the bottom heel of the bowl gouge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and sharpen my bowl gouge, which, by the way, if you need to learn how to sharpen your bowl gouge or any of your other wood turning tools, check out my tool sharpening course over on my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Okay, so here you can see the heel. The bevel on this bowl gouge is relatively long, and it ends in the heel on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that heel. Now, I'm not messing around with the bevel at this point. I'm just reducing the size of the bevel and taking that heel away. What was causing the lines or the grooves on the inside of that bowl is the rotation or the diameter of the inside of the bowl is relatively tight, and my bevel was wide. So as I was progressing, the heel of my bevel was rubbing and leaving a groove as I was proceeding through the interior of the bowl. And that bevel is the problem. So here you can see I've removed the heel and I've reduced the size of that bevel. So now we should be able to turn that tighter inside interior and get a smooth, clean finish without those grooves in it. And just take your time. This is done freehand. You can see how I'm moving it back and forth. I'm just lightly keeping my knuckles on the tool rest there. Okay, so here are the grooves that were created when the long bevel and the heel were rubbing the bowl. Now let's see what happens with the bowl gouge where I've reduced the heel. Just take your time. Now remember, this is a finishing cut. We do not want to be racing this. We want to take a nice, slow pass and just gently move across the piece. Look at this. You can already see how much smoother that is compared to the previous area. Now we've got a nice, smooth finish that barely needs to be sanded compared to what we had before. So that's a very important secret. If you're seeing grooves or lines on the inside of your bowl, there's a good chance that your bowl gouge bevel is a little wider than it needs to be. This is especially true if you're making small bowls, because rotating that bevel around the interior of a very small bowl is going to be difficult to not rub that heel. So if you're having that problem, now you know what to do. So I'm going to continue working down the sides and clearing away the material on the interior of this bowl. And you can see here, I'm not being super aggressive with this. I'm not trying to make one pass and remove a wide area of material. I'm just making small passes, stop frequently, and check that wall thickness and make sure it's the way you want it. You want to sneak up on the thickness as opposed to getting too aggressive and then having a thin area in there. Trust me, I was there too. When the first bowls you do, it's inevitable. You're going to go through and you're going to have all kinds of issues. But if you pay attention and slow this process down in important areas, and this is an important area to slow down a bit, take your time. You'll have nice even walls that way. I had plenty of bowls where the wall thickness was really nice up towards the rim and coming down into the bowl, and all of a sudden, down maybe halfway down into the bowl, the wall got really thin and it just didn't work out. That happens to all of us. There's nothing wrong. Learn from it and then move forward. And the secret to solving that is just go nice and slow and sneak up on the ideal thickness. That's what you're seeing me do here. stop frequently and check that wall thickness and make sure it's what you want it to be. Okay, now I have a high spot right here. Instead of making another pass with the bowl gouge, which will almost inevitably lead to creating a thinner wall down below, I'm going to use my round nose scraper. Now, the round nose scraper, I don't use it very often. It's perfect for a situation like this. This is almost equivalent to the shaving that I do on the exterior of the bowl with the shear scrape, but we can't do the shear scrape inside the bowl because of the fact that the bowl gouge will get a nasty catch. Instead, we can use a round nose scraper just to scrape away the high spot. Now, I've got a video all about the round nose scraper if you want to check that out. Okay, so I'm going to install my longer tool rest that has a curve in it. I'll have a link to this and all the tools I use in this video in the description below this video, so check that out. And if you'd like to see all the other tools that I recommend, you can go to turnawoodbowl.com/gear to see all the gear that I recommend and I use. The tool rest extension here lets me get nice and deep into the bowl like this and have good bowl gouge support as I'm making these final cuts. Just working a small area at a time to make sure that I get a nice smooth level finish all the way across the interior of the bowl. Now remember, we want that shape to be a continuous curve from the top of the rim all the way down to the bottom. And there you could see it was a little bit high still. You can see how that area is protruding from the bottom. We just want a nice continuous flowing curve. And I did this entire bowl with my 1/2 inch 55-degree bevel swept back bowl gouge. And hopefully you can see that we don't need a lot of tools to turn a bowl. Yes, you can buy tool sets that have lots of different tool sizes and shapes and that, but you really only need a couple tools to turn a wood bowl. In this case, we used a 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and I used my spindle detail gouge to shape the tenon of the bowl, and that was it. Okay, here I have the surface almost where I need it to be. I have a couple different points where I started and stopped, so I'm backing up just a bit and making a really light pass across all those different surfaces just to blend them all together. And remember not to push through the center here because you will tear out fibers right in the middle of the bowl, where unfortunately that's where our eyeball goes when we look into a bowl. We're looking right at the center, so we don't want to tear any fibers out. So go nice and slow when you make that last pass across the center bottom of the bowl. Okay, so now it's time to sand this piece out. I'm going to go through all my grits. I start out at 120, and then I go to 180, 240, and then 320. Basically what happens is we're going through in 50% increments. So if you start with 120, 50% of 120 is 60. You add 60 to 120, that's 180. If you have, and you just proceed that way. So the nice way about doing that is you're gradually going up and you're erasing the previous scratch marks from the previous sandpaper until you get to 320 and 400. At 400, it's really hard for our eye to pick up the scratch marks. You could go higher than that. I don't see much of a need to be doing that, so I don't go beyond 400 grit. A lot of times I'll stop at 320. And then I'll take my time and I'll work areas where I'm seeing scratch marks. Typically that's going to be in the ingrained areas, places where the sandpaper has crossed 90 degrees across the grain itself. I'm just using the edge of the disc as I'm sanding. I'm coming up around the rim. Now, the rim because it's thin and delicate, I typically won't start sanding that until I get into the higher grits like the 240 and the 180. And the reason for that is it will create a nice smooth finish, but it won't remove a lot of material. If I start sanding, especially with the lathe moving at 120 grit, that 120 grit could quickly sand away the edge of that bowl and start changing and modifying the shape that I created for the rim. So instead of doing that, I will only sand that edge when I get up to the final grits, because they do the least amount of removal of the wood. Just take your time and sand with each disc. Now, this doesn't have to take a long time. I have a video all on how to sand wood bowls, and if you haven't seen that already, I highly recommend checking it out, because you do not have to be sanding for hours and hours. Plus that's not fun. I'd rather be turning bowls than sanding, so check out that video. Okay, I'm spraying this with some water right now for two purposes. I want to show you guys the chatoyance in there. See that shine? See when the light hits it, it shimmers? Those are the grains I was mentioning that they're at different directions, so they shift the light around and they give you that really fun little shimmer look. The other purpose for misting this bowl with water is to raise the wood grain. I've let the bowl dry and I'm sanding it again. What happens is there's little fibers that are basically just laying down and are pushed up against the wood. By spraying this with water, it inflates those loose ends of the fibers and they will rise up. And when they rise up and then dry, then you can sand it and you get an even smoother finish. And there you can see the beautiful chatoyance. You can see how the grain of the wood is shimmering, and there's no finish on this. It's going to be a beautiful piece when it's completely finished. Okay, so I'm going to take this off the lathe and I'm going to reverse it with a jam chuck. This is a very simple jam chuck that you can make very easily. What I'm doing here is this is sat for a while on the shelf and it's changed shape a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new edge on the front. That way this rotates nice and smooth with no wobble. And I want there to be kind of a large area up at the front so it grips the center of the bowl in a large way versus just a point. So I'll put a piece of foam pad in there and I'll bring the tailstock back up. Now I have full access to the base of the bowl, in this case the tenon, and I'm going to turn that tenon into the foot of the bowl. The exterior of the shape of the bowl is going to come down to pretty much where that shoulder was, and the tenon is going to be removed, and then I will make a recessed area as well. I want there to be a nice rim that's touching the table when this is seated. I do not want to have a large flat area on the bottom of the bowl. Even though this is dry or relatively equalized, there's still a chance that it could shift just a little bit. And if you have a big flat bottom on the bowl, just the most minute little shift in the wood is going to create a wobble, and it's going to make it not seat flat on a table. So by creating a nice round rim, there's a much better chance that that's going to seat well when it's sitting on a tabletop. I'm essentially doing the same techniques that I used on the interior of the bowl. Just create the shape and work down to the middle, slowly remove more material and work down until you get to the bottom of the bowl. And again, you don't want to get very aggressive here. Obviously, a catch at this point can be not good for the finished piece. So you want to go nice and smooth and slow here. Just take your time. If you're not comfortable going this far down, you can stop at this point and you can use a small little saw and cut that off. Now what I'm doing here is I'm checking and making sure there's no imperfections in the wood that's going to compromise the connection here. Sometimes if there's a void or a knot in there, that can be weakened and it might pop off at this point. So if that were the case, I would stop right there, but it's relatively solid, so I'm continuing. Now I'm going to switch over to my spindle detail gouge. That allows me to get down into a finer point a little bit easier. Like I said, you can just stop right now and saw this off and then sand down the nub if you'd like. I like to get as much done on the lathe as I can. So I will remove as much material as possible, make sure that curve is continuous, just like it is on the inside of the bowl. And then I will apply forward pressure and turn the lathe off and then apply more pressure. Sometimes it won't sever and you have to hand rotate it like I just did there a little bit, but then it'll come right off. And there's just a little bit of area that needs to be sanded at this point. Okay. It's looking pretty good. So I will take the edge of the disc and just sand that area. I will rotate the bowl around so that I don't create a groove on one side. I want to sand it out evenly so it looks nice and smooth and you don't have any ruts anywhere, but you want that nub to be completely gone. Just keep moving it around and sanding it, and it will look really nice. Okay, so with the bowl complete, I'm going to go ahead and sign it. This is my wood burning tool that I use. Again, I'll have this in the description below, a link to this and all the tools I use, so check that out. I just take my time. I use a chisel bit to sign my name to the bottom of the bowls.
Well, here it is, the finished turn bowl. This is a nice, simple OG shape. I think it works well with this. What I find is really interesting is it doesn't seem as if there's going to be enough material in that bowl when I start to be able to do as much shaping as we do, but it's incredible how much you can actually get away with. And these walls aren't super thin, so there's a lot of material here that you can do a lot of shaping with after the fact. So I hope this gives you some confidence to want to do a twice turned bowl and get a nice finished round shape that's pretty stable after the wood has been equalized. If you want to learn more about equalizing wood or working with green wood or working with raw wood, check out my Tree to Bowl online e-course. You're going to want to check that out. I've got tons of information there about how to handle raw wood to turn it into a bowl like this. So check that out. Now, I've sanded this down to 400 grit and I'm going to hand it off to the people over at Tried and True. It's really easy to apply the Tried and True finish to a piece like this bowl, and it has great look and great durability, and it's food safe. Now, Tried and True doesn't pay me. They probably should pay me to sponsor this because I talk about them a lot. Why do I talk about them a lot? Because I love the products. Mainly because it's really simple to apply. There's no other added chemicals or anything I have to do to clean up or anything like that. The products are really simple. They're linseed oil. Their Danish oil is just linseed oil. Their original product is linseed oil and beeswax, and their varnish is pine resin. That's it. There's no extra chemicals. There's no metals in it like you find in a lot of other products. So I know that these products going on my bowls are safe for use, especially around food. And that's where most of my products get used, in the kitchen with salads or putting food in them. So I really want to make sure that I've got a really simple product in there. And quite honestly, I think simple should be the middle name for all their products, because not only are they simply created, but they're simple to apply and they just simply work. I don't know exactly what kind of finish they're going to use on this bowl, and I'm kind of excited to see how they finish it. My guess is they're going to finish it very similar to the way that I finish it, because I do follow the instructions on their can, so there shouldn't be that much of a difference. But I can't wait to see how it looks once they're done applying the finish to it. And if you'd like to see the results of what they did, I'll put a link in the description below this video, so check that out. That way you can see what how this bowl turned out in the end. All right, guys, if you like this video, please do me a huge favor and, you guessed it, click that like button. Thank you. I really appreciate that. If you check out any of my other videos, which I highly recommend that you do, please also click the like button on those videos. It helps those videos, it helps the channel, it helps everything out. I greatly appreciate it. And if you're not subscribing, why aren't you? Please subscribe. Also, if you're interested or curious, or if you've been turning wood bowls for a long time and you want to learn more, then you really should check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I have over 100 articles on nothing other than turning bowls. So check it out, turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, as always, until next time, happy turning.